Elias stood frozen in the building lobby, as if the floor itself were holding him in place. The interview on the 17th floor was crucial, yet anxiety burned in his chest like a fire he didn't know how to put out. He could feel his heart pounding faster than the ticking clock, each breath short and uneven. Around him, people came and went as if their lives moved with purpose. Everyone except him. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, trying to remember why he had come this far. The interview confirmation message still echoed in his mind, along with the line, "Be on time." But punctuality was never his problem. What unsettled him was the storm inside. The bright lobby walls seemed to inch closer, the air growing heavier than it should. He ran a hand across his face, trying to steady himself, but only felt cold sweat down his neck. Elias knew he had to choose, step into the elevator or turn around. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped forward, but something inside him cracked. His chest tightened, his hands prickled, and his legs refused to move. The doors began to close, and he backed away instinctively. Once again, anxiety had taken control. He checked the time, 5 minutes left. He inhaled deeply, leaned against the wall, and tried to steady his breathing, repeating to himself, 1 minute. I just need 1 minute. That minute became a small refuge, a space where he closed his eyes and held the fear at a distance. 1 minute that gave him clarity, balance, and the courage to try again. When he opened his eyes, he felt capable of moving forward. The elevator opened once more, as if fate itself were granting him a second chance. This time, he stepped inside without looking back, unaware that this 1 minute would become the breaking point of his entire reality. The elevator rose slowly, and Elias watched the floor numbers shift one by one. Even though his heart was still racing, there was a sense of order he hadn't felt before. That minute in the lobby had placed a small barrier between him and the panic that usually consumed him. Still, his mind replayed every possible question, every possible mistake, every word he should avoid. He gripped the metal handrail, feeling the cold surface help anchor him to the present. When the doors opened on the 17th floor, a slight tremor ran through his legs. The hallway was silent, long, perfectly lit, almost intimidating. He adjusted his jacket, took a deep breath, and checked the email one last time to be sure he was at the right door. The company entrance looked more imposing than he had imagined. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated for 2 seconds, afraid his insecurity would show immediately. Before he could step back, the door opened. A calm-faced receptionist greeted him and told him the interviewer was already waiting. Elias walked forward with controlled steps, trying to match his breathing to his pace. He felt every sound, every vibration in the building, every heartbeat slamming inside his chest. It was as if his entire body were hyper-aware, ready to expose his anxiety at any moment. The interview room was spacious, with huge windows overlooking the city from above. The interviewer looked up the moment Elias walked in. His analytical eyes scanned him instantly, as if trying to read his character before he spoke a word. Elias swallowed hard and sat down slowly. The moment had arrived. There was no going back. All he could do was speak and hope he didn't fall apart on the inside. The interview began with simple questions, but for Elias, every word felt like a tightrope. He tried to keep his voice steady, hiding the pressure inside him that threatened to break through. He spoke about his work experience, the projects he had been part of, and the lessons he had learned. The interviewer listened in silence, with an attention so sharp it disarmed him. That silence, so long, so heavy, made Elias feel every small mistake like a giant shadow behind him. As minutes passed, the questions grew deeper, almost personal. At first, Elias answered carefully, afraid of saying too much. But slowly, something in him began to open. Maybe it was the emotional exhaustion, maybe the minute he took in the lobby, but his honesty began to spill out uncontrollably. Each answer came without polish, without rehearsed lines, just truth, raw, unfiltered truth. The interviewer laced his fingers together and watched him quietly, as if he had found something unexpected inside him. Elias felt the urge to fill the silence, to explain himself more, but this time he didn't. He let the moment exist without trying to control it. When asked about his biggest weakness, he didn't reach for elegant phrasing. He admitted that fear paralyzed him, but that he kept moving anyway. His voice trembled slightly, but the words were real, painfully real. The interviewer nodded slowly, wrote something down, and ended the interview with a polite gesture. Elias stood with legs slightly weak, surprised by what he had revealed. When he stepped back into the hallway, an unfamiliar calm washed over him. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He didn't know if he would get the job, but something inside him was shifting. And that change began with 1 minute. Elias took the elevator down, and this time his breathing was steadier. He leaned against the metal wall, feeling, for the first time in a long while, his anxiety step back. He replayed every moment of the interview in his mind. The uncomfortable silences, the vulnerable answers, the tension in his hands. And yet, he didn't regret any of it. He had faced his fear. He walked into that room knowing he might fail, and he hadn't run. When he reached the lobby, the atmosphere felt different, less threatening. The movement of people, the rushed conversations, the sound of revolving doors. Everything seemed distant now, as if he were observing from outside. He stepped out of the building, letting the cold air wash the tension from his body. For a moment, he felt a soft kind of freedom, a breath not born from success, but from the simple act of trying. On his way to the bus stop, Elias checked his phone. There was a notification from the company. "Thank you for attending. We will contact you soon." It wasn't a guarantee, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was, at the very least, a possibility. And for someone who almost turned back before stepping in, that possibility was a quiet victory. Elias put his phone away gently, as if safeguarding a spark inside the dark. While waiting for the bus, he looked up at the tall, illuminated buildings. He thought about everything he felt, everything he overcame, and everything that might still come next. He didn't know what the final outcome would be, but he was at peace with the path he chose. Sometimes 1 minute was enough to break him. That day, 1 minute had given him strength, and he had no idea that in another reality, that same minute would be the difference between moving forward and losing everything. When Elias arrived home, he let himself fall onto the couch, exhausted but relieved. The silence inside the apartment was deep, yet it didn't unsettle him. He allowed the exhaustion to flow through him slowly, as if the entire day were unfolding across his chest. "I did it," he thought. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way someone else would have. But he did it, and for him, that was monumental. As he prepared a cup of coffee, he remembered the exact minute he spent frozen in the lobby, paralyzed by fear. A minute that, on any other day, would have filled him with guilt. But now he saw it differently. That minute had been his pause, his shield, his opportunity to return to himself before facing the world. It felt strange to think that such a small space in time could hold so many invisible consequences. He sat by the window with the steaming cup in his hands and watched the city from his apartment. The nightlights flickered like artificial stars between skyscrapers. Each one seemed to remind him that he could shine too, even if his light came from vulnerability. He didn't know whether the company would choose him, but he knew something essential had shifted within him. And that was worth more than he expected. Before sleeping, he left his phone charging and breathed deeply. There were no new messages, no reply, no hint of what tomorrow would bring. But that uncertainty no longer frightened him. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to rest. In this life, in this timeline, Elias waited 1 minute, and that minute protected him. Unaware that, in another version of the same day, the absence of that minute was about to destroy everything. Here is where the other life begins. The life Elias didn't live, but was only 1 minute away from becoming his. Now you'll see what would have happened if he had stepped into the elevator immediately. Welcome to the alternate reality. Welcome to what almost happened. 1 minute later. In this other version of the day, Elias doesn't stop in the lobby. He doesn't take a deep breath, doesn't close his eyes, doesn't look for calm. Fear pushes him like a wave, and he chooses to ignore it completely. When the elevator doors open, he steps in immediately, almost as if waiting even 1 second would break his momentum. His hands tremble slightly, but he tries to hide it. He thinks that if he gets there quickly, everything will end quickly. He doesn't know that, in his haste, he has just tipped the first domino of an invisible chain reaction. The elevator rises normally at first. Elias watches the numbers change and repeats the answers he rehearsed the night before. But before reaching the 5th floor, a dull metallic thud echoes inside the cabin. A heavy impact, followed by a brief flicker of the lights. Then, complete darkness. The elevator jolts violently and stops between 2 levels. Elias loses balance and grasps the side rail, a shock ripping through his chest. Suddenly, the silence becomes absolute. He presses the emergency button. Nothing happens. He presses it again, harder. Still silence. He bangs on the door, but only gets a hollow echo that feels like mockery. The darkness makes the space feel tighter, more suffocating. The air grows warm, thick, heavy to swallow. Anxiety slides through him like a serpent that knows every vulnerable place. He tries to breathe slowly, but each inhale breaks halfway. Meanwhile, on the 17th floor, the interview room remains bright and ready. The chair where Elias should be sitting is still empty. The interviewer checks his watch with one raised eyebrow, then closes the folder like a judge handing down a sentence without emotion. To him, punctuality is character. Absence is disinterest. He doesn't know that, trapped between floors, there is a young man fighting not to fall apart. And even if he knew, perhaps nothing would change. For some people, time is worth more than any explanation. Minutes inside the motionless elevator begin to lose shape. For Elias, every second feels like a rope tightening a little more around his chest. He tries to control his breathing by counting silently, but every time he reaches 10, the air breaks again. The total darkness turns the cabin into a sealed box without direction or reference. He hits the door with the palm of his hand, timid at first, then with growing desperation. The metallic sound echoes back, returning his fear amplified. Anxiety starts to take control of his body. His hands tremble, his throat tightens, and a wave of dizziness rises from his stomach. The air feels heavier, warmer, as if the elevator were shrinking around him. He leans back against the cold wall and slowly slides down to the floor, searching for a position that feels less suffocating. But even there, knees hugged to his chest, claustrophobia follows him like a shapeless shadow. His thoughts shatter into ever more suffocating scenarios. In the interview room, the atmosphere is the complete opposite. The favored candidate enters with firm steps, portfolio perfectly arranged, a practiced, confident smile. He sits, shakes the interviewer's hand, and begins answering every question calmly, clearly, precisely. The interviewer watches him with visible approval, nodding at key moments, taking notes. To him, that is the kind of candidate who deserves a place, prepared, present, reliable. He has no idea that elsewhere in the building, someone is fighting for air in the dark. Meanwhile, Elias bangs on the door again, though with less strength, his arms weakening. He presses the emergency button one more time, even knowing it won't work. Desperation blends with a painful thought that pierces him without warning. If I had waited 1 minute, just one, I would have taken a different elevator. I wouldn't be here. The thought hurts because he knows it's true. 1 minute, One small, fragile moment could have changed everything that now feels inevitable. After a stretch of time Elias can't even measure, he finally hears a different sound behind the metal walls. First distant footsteps, then muffled voices arguing softly. A heavy thud rattles through the elevator structure, followed by a technical remark about an electrical system failure. A worker's voice calls out, asking if anyone is inside. Elias responds with a broken, "I'm here," barely louder than a whisper tangled in desperation. A wave of relief washes through him, but it's not enough to erase the fear already carved into him. The elevator lights flicker for a brief second, revealing his pale face, shirt clinging with cold sweat, and trembling hands. Then they shut off again, returning him to that oppressive darkness. Outside, the technicians explain that they'll need to open the door manually, and that it may take a few minutes. The wait, reasonable to anyone else, feels like another emotional trial. Elias tries to stay seated, but his heartbeat remains frantic and uneven, as if pounding against his throat. He wipes away tears with his sleeve, shame burning even in solitude. In the interview room, the favored candidate is finishing his presentation. His answers are solid, his body language composed and confident. The interviewer listens with clear satisfaction, as if every word confirms that he has found exactly what he was looking for. In his mind, the decision is already made. The young man who never appeared is just a footnote, a name to discard with polite formality. The interview ends with a firm handshake, and the position is no longer available. When the technicians finally manage to open the elevator door a few centimeters, a line of light slices through the darkness like a knife. They work until the gap is wide enough for Elias to crawl out. He steps over the metal frame on shaking legs, breathing the hallway air like oxygen after hours underwater. He checks the time with frantic urgency. The interview ended long ago, too long. The minute he refused to give himself has become a chasm between him and the opportunity he sought. Elias moved down the hallway with unsteady steps, like someone arriving late to a place he no longer belongs to. Each meter felt heavier on his shoulders, as if the building itself knew he had lost something long before he did. When he stepped into the company's reception area, the receptionist looked up with surprise, her expression shifting automatically into professional neutrality. He tried to force a smile, but only managed something tired and fractured. "I was in the elevator. It got stuck. I couldn't notify anyone," he murmured softly, struggling to hold himself together. The receptionist listened politely, but with the distance of someone who holds no real power over what comes next. "Let me check with the interviewer," she said before disappearing down a side hallway. Elias remained there, standing with his fingers intertwined and his breath uneven. He stared at the floor, trying not to picture the scene beyond those walls, the irritated interviewer, the confident favored candidate, the position all but sealed. A bitter pressure settled deep in his chest. He already knew the answer. When the receptionist returned, the verdict was clear on her face. "The interviewer thanks you for coming, but the process has already concluded. The position has been filled." Her words were polite, almost gentle, but the impact was devastating. Elias lowered his gaze, feeling the floor pull him downward like gravity with intent. He nodded, forcing gratitude he did not feel, while inside everything collapsed in silence. It wasn't his fault the elevator trapped him, but the weight of failure wrapped around him anyway, like a coat he could not remove. He left the reception with slumped shoulders and walked toward the lobby. There, in front of the wall where, in another life, he stood still for 1 minute to calm himself, he stopped. The same place, but a different reality. A reality shaped by haste, by not pausing, by denying himself that single breath of space. He looked at the elevator, now blocked off with yellow tape, then toward the exit door. And in his mind, one truth became painfully clear. If he had waited 1 minute, just one, everything would be different. Elias stepped out into the street with the feeling of carrying an invisible weight across his shoulders. The cool air brought no relief, only a strange mixture of exhaustion and disappointment that seemed to cling to his skin. He walked slowly toward the bus stop, as if each step confirmed that something irreversible had happened. He sat on the metal bench, elbows resting on his knees, head hanging between his hands. Car lights, passing conversations, the endless flow of the city. Everything moved as usual, except him. As he stared at his blurred reflection in the shelter's glass, a sharp ache pierced his chest. It wasn't just the lost interview. It was the certainty that he had been one instant away from another fate entirely. He tried to remind himself that it wasn't his fault. No one could predict an elevator malfunction. But the words felt hollow, even inside his own mind. Because he knew the real cause came earlier, in the impulse not to stop, not to give himself the minute he so desperately needed, and that realization tore at him. The bus arrived, and Elias boarded without looking at anyone. He sat by the window, resting his forehead against the cold glass while the city blurred past in streaks of distorted light. Every building that passed looked like a different version of his life. One where he arrived on time, one where he paused to breathe, one where he was heard. But none of those possibilities belonged to this timeline. Here, all that remained was the reality built from a choice as small as not waiting. When he reached his apartment, he let his backpack fall to the floor and collapsed onto his bed with his shoes still on, unable to process the day completely. He stared at the ceiling for several long seconds before whispering in a voice barely there. 1 minute, just 1 minute. He closed his eyes, letting silence fill the room. In this life, Elias didn't get the job, and he didn't give himself the time that could have changed everything. In this life, 1 minute later, his fate was already written.